it was not ideal for them to be seen as anything other than an ally to this community. And that was made very obvious in the treatment and effectiveness of removing me safely from that situation.
Why were you threatened and barricaded into a room and held for ransom for hours on end? I mean, what was it you were saying that was so terrible?
I was invited to speak on my experience of my senior year in competing against a male. Nothing opinionated about what I shared. It was sheerly the exact lived experience of what me and my teammates and fellow competitors dealt with.
What you just watched is honestly one of the most disturbing congressional testimonies I've seen in a long time, and Senator Josh Hawley's reaction is exactly why moments like this matter. This isn't political theater. This isn't culture war noise. This is a U.S. senator sitting across from a woman who says she was physically barricaded, threatened, and held for ransom on an American university campus, and instead of dodging or deflecting, Josh Hawley does what very few people in power are willing to do. He listens, and he asks the questions that everyone else is afraid to ask. What stands out to me immediately is that Senator Hawley doesn't interrupt, doesn't minimize, and doesn't sugarcoat what Riley Gaines went through. He treats it with the seriousness it deserves, because it is serious. Whether you agree with Riley Gaines or not, the idea that someone could be trapped for hours by a mob and law enforcement fails to act should alarm every single person watching this. If you appreciate calm but firm accountability, real questions, and unfiltered congressional moments like this, you're in the right place. This is Congress Lens. I'm Audrey. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because we break down what actually happens in Congress without the spin. Now let's watch the full exchange.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Ms. Gaines, I want to start with you. Thank you for your courage in being here today. Thank you for your courage and advocacy for women. You have been subjected to an unbelievable amount of abuse. You talk about intimidation, threats of violence. You have suffered it. I want to put up here a picture so everybody can see it. This was the welcome you were treated to at San Francisco State University just a couple of months ago when a mob assembled where you were supposed to speak, I believe for over 3 hours, screamed, threatened you, barricaded you in a room. Do I have that basically correct?
Yes, I was held for ransom for 3.5 hours by hundreds of these protesters, as you see on the board. They demanded that I had to pay them money if I wanted to make it home to see my family safe again. The law enforcement in San Francisco, I respect, and I think law enforcement is what's brave, not me, and I respect all law enforcement, but the law enforcement I was met with in San Francisco, in my opinion, failed miserably in effectively doing their job. They had mentioned that it was not ideal for them to be seen as anything other than an ally to this community. And that was made very obvious in the treatment and effectiveness of removing me safely from that situation.
Why were you threatened and barricaded into a room and held for ransom for hours on end? I mean, what was it you were saying that was so terrible?
I was invited to speak on my experience of my senior year in competing against a male. Nothing opinionated about what I shared. It was sheerly the exact lived experience of what me and my teammates and fellow competitors dealt with. And so I spoke. After my speech, there was, of course, a lot of protesters in the room, which I'm totally fine with people protesting. It's their right to protest. But what I'm not fine with is when it does turn violent in the way that it did. Because protesters afterwards, they rushed into the room. They turned off the lights. They rushed to the front. Myself and others were assaulted, and that's ultimately when I was held for hostage for 3.5 hours.
It's just unbelievable, unbelievable. Thank you for your courage in the midst of that. Let's talk a little bit about the message that you were sharing, and you started to talk about it in your opening statement. Just tell us about your experience, because nobody can question your experience. I don't think anybody sitting at the table, and certainly nobody at this podium, has had the experience that you have had. You were talking about just the incredible surprise, shall I say, to put it gently, of finding a biological man, a 6'4" biological man in your locker room and having to accept that without being asked about it, without being told about it even. What was that like for you? Tell us about that.
Again, we only became aware we would be undressing next to a man was when we had to see a man undressing while we were simultaneously undressing. And so I immediately left the locker room and I went up to one of the officials on the pool deck. And I said, what are the guidelines to allow a man into our locker room? I know the guidelines for the competition, but what are the guidelines for the locker room? And he so nonchalantly said back, "Oh, we actually got around this by making locker rooms unisex." And so I'm thinking to myself in these brief moments, first and foremost, you just admitted this is a male by acknowledging how you had to change your rules to make the locker rooms unisex. You acknowledge that we do not share the same sex, first and foremost. Secondly, unisex. Any man could have walked into our locker room, any coach, any official, any man who wanted to would have had full reins to, and bare minimum, we weren't forewarned about it. And that's the traumatizing part. Of course, the experience in and of the locker room itself is traumatizing, but I think for me, it was so easy for them to dismiss our rights to privacy. Senator Durbin, in your opening statement, you had mentioned this rhetoric. It's you had mentioned that what message does it send to trans individuals? And my combat to that is, what message does this send to women, to young girls who are denied of these opportunities? So easily their rights to privacy and safety thrown out of the window to protect a small population, protect one group as long as they're happy. What about us? That is the overall general consensus of how we all felt in that locker room.
Why do you think it is that the NCAA and so many people in power seem intent on just erasing your opinion, your views, the whole category of women? I noticed that recently you just posted this to social media about a message that Harvard was sending around, I think, to its swimmers, telling them, don't talk about Leah Thomas, don't share your opinions. If you get contacted by a member of the media, then refer that to the university. Don't say anything, for heaven's sake. Tell us about this. I mean, this has been your experience over and over and over. You're told as a woman, just shut up, don't say anything. What's that like?
That is continually happening. And if we do speak up, you're immediately labeled as some name. They will call you everything under the sun, whether it's transphobic, homophobic, racist, white supremacist, domestic terrorist. They will throw them all at you in hopes to deter you, in hopes to silence you. Leah Thomas's teammates, they were forced every single week to go to mandatory LGBTQ education meetings to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Leah Thomas. They were told that they're not allowed to take a stance because their school has already taken their stance for them. They were told that you will never get a job, you will never get into grad school, you will lose your friends, you will lose your scholarship and playing time if you speak out. They told these girls that if you do speak out, and any harm whatsoever comes towards Thomas's way, whether that's through social media, whether that's physical, mental, emotional harm, then you are solely responsible, and you could be responsible for a potential death. And you don't want that, do you? Of course not. Who would ever want to be responsible in a potential death? But that is the emotional blackmail that is plaguing this country, especially in universities.
Last question, and I'll ask this and then give you a chance to respond, and I'm done with this, Mr. Chairman. Let me give you a chance to respond to something that Leah Thomas said recently, publicly. She said this publicly. They're using, this quote now, they're using the guise of feminism, they meaning you, using the guise of feminism to sort of push transphobic beliefs, meaning you advocating for women, women's rights is actually just a cover for transphobia. Do you want to respond to that?
Feminism is not a fluid term. The original and the meaning of what it means to be a feminist is to uphold, respect, honor, embrace, and celebrate women on our own physical ceilings, our own uniqueness. That term has not changed. And what this really is a male mansplaining what it is to be a feminist, which I honestly think is pretty ironic, and it's something we've seen before.
Thank you, Senator Hawley.
All right, now that you've seen the entire testimony, let me say this clearly. Senator Josh Hawley did exactly what an elected official is supposed to do in that moment. Josh Hawley didn't grandstand. He didn't rush Riley Gaines. He didn't reduce her experience to a talking point. He allowed her to explain, in her own words, how she was invited to speak about her lived experience as a college athlete, and how that invitation turned into a 3.5-hour ordeal where she says she was threatened, assaulted, and effectively held hostage. What struck me most was how Josh Hawley framed his questions. He didn't just ask what happened, he asked why. Why was Riley Gaines barricaded? Why was she threatened? What exactly was she saying that justified that level of response? And the answer, according to Riley Gaines, was simple. She spoke about competing against a biological male. No insults. No policy manifesto. Just her experience. Josh Hawley's response, calling the situation unbelievable, wasn't performative. It reflected what any reasonable person would think watching this unfold. A woman says she was locked in a room, screamed at, and told she had to pay money to leave safely, while campus authorities stood by. That should never be normalized. Josh Hawley also zeroed in on something the media often glosses over, the locker room issue. Riley Gaines explained that she wasn't warned. She wasn't consulted. She found out in real time, while undressing, that a biological male was present. Josh Hawley didn't dismiss that discomfort. He didn't lecture her about language. He let her explain why it was traumatic and why being told afterward that the locker room had been made unisex only made things worse. That matters, because too often, women are told their discomfort is irrelevant if acknowledging it causes inconvenience or controversy. Another key moment was when Josh Hawley addressed the culture of silence. Riley Gaines described athletes being warned not to speak, threatened with loss of scholarships, careers, and even blamed for potential harm if they voiced dissent. Josh Hawley allowed that testimony to breathe because it exposes something bigger than one incident. It reveals institutional pressure and intimidation. And when Riley Gaines was accused of using feminism as a cover for transphobia, Josh Hawley didn't jump in to speak for her. He gave her the floor. Her response, that feminism is about honoring women's biological realities and rights, was left uncut, uninterrupted, and on the public record. That's how accountability works. You don't have to agree with every position Josh Hawley holds to recognize this. He showed moral clarity in this hearing. He didn't try to erase women's concerns to avoid backlash. He didn't pretend this was just heated rhetoric. He treated it as a civil rights issue, and that takes political courage in today's climate. This exchange is exactly why congressional oversight matters. And whether people like it or not, Senator Josh Hawley put a spotlight on an issue many would rather keep buried. That's my take. If you value real conversations, real testimony, and real accountability, stay locked in here at Congress Lens. I'm Audrey, and I'll see you in the next breakdown.